Legislative Summit Media Madness. Nice to see you. I was speaking to you. Hello. Great to see that man here. I want to talk to you, Brad. Thank you for joining us. And where's Brad? There we go. Oh, yeah. As our senior member of the journalism crew, we've been here since from the get-go, Scott Braddock. So, again, this is something we started, Lone Star Legislative Summit, I think back in 2014. I believe it was 2014 we did our first Media Madness. You weren't the first one. Was it 16? No, we did 14. Well, okay. There's, what is it, BC and, this would be BB, before Braddock. And but listen, thank you for being in here. This is really going to be a fascinating program because what we're going to talk about, hopefully we're going to talk about, is what's going on in the state of politics in Texas, what's happened, what might happen, what's going to happen, and what the next session might look like. And now I'm going to tell you, as a somewhat disinterested observer, I look forward to hearing what we have to say. But let me introduce our panel. Oh yeah, look at Jay Dean right on the front row. The way this started, I said, what we need to do. I'm tired of having the people in the media talk bad about elected officials, but we never get a chance to shoot back. We don't know what they're going to say. I said, here's an idea, and the chamber hated this idea. This is a Chamber of Commerce event. I said, let's have a Media Madness, and let's invite the best journalists around the state to come here. Let's ply them with booze at the cocktail reception, get them loose lipped, and now they're going to talk bad about us in front of us. So you see where Jay is on the front row. I think I saw Stan Lambert in the back. Stan, my junior Wildcats back here. Stan, thank you for making the drive over. But we've already got some remarkable people here. Of course, I'm going to start with our moderator, and then we'll hand the mic back to him. But Josh Edwards, editor of the paper here, a long distinguished career. Grew up in Paris, Texas. Born somewhere around Dallas. I was going to say, Scott, that this was essentially we're talking about Texas politics. Because what I just read is these three are not from Texas. So we got a bunch of carpetbaggers coming here to tell us about Texas politics. And I thought Josh was from Mississippi, but Josh is actually born in Texas. Scott is a true born Texan, and y'all got here as fast as you could. So, but this is going to be great. So let me just very quick introduction. Of course, Josh Edwards, you all know Josh. Debbie Sandals done a fantastic job there, and then I come down here to Scott Braddock, our senior member of the panel. Really just looking at the hairline, senior and everything. And then, but Scott is with...
I had more hair the first time we did.
Yes, you did. We all did. But Scott is with Quorum Report. Harvey Kronberg started that, but Scott's taking that reign. But what a fantastic organization. 41 years, I believe. Really an outstanding longevity. And really good source of information for people across Texas. So Scott, thank you for coming back. Alex Samuels had started out at the Trib, at least that's when we first met, and now she's with Texas Monthly. And has done some fantastic work in reporting that, and appreciate you being here, Alex. And of course, then I got Zach Desparts. I think that's a French derivation. Would that be correct? Yeah. So as you know, we started out at Eau Claire. We were persecuted, run out. We've been run out of a lot of places, but in fact, very recently. Zach Sparks is with, we were Eau Claire's in Oak, Florida, North Ireland, dropped the O, came to America in 1700. So, but Zach, thank you for being here. And then Brad Johnson. Brad's a new addition to this. Brad's with the publication called The Texan. Connie Burton is the CEO publisher. Okay. And so it really represents, I think, a good cross-section of journalists in Texas. And I would check, I want to let all of you know, you three, I vetted you all with Braddock. I said, okay, can you be on the same stage with these people? And you barely passed, Brad. You barely passed. So, but Braddock, but really, the Texan, for those of you who are familiar with it, is a relative, I'm going to call it Writer Center. Is that fair? Publication. And the other, it covers the political spectrum. There's not I don't think anybody's here from Providence, so we're okay with that. But this is going to be an interesting cross-section. 3 non-Texans, although non-Texans working at the Texan. We'll come back to that. But this is a great group of people who've really been following this. And what Scott told me, which I didn't realize, but particularly you two guys, y'all traveled around a lot together through the primary season. We see each other a lot. So we're all interested in the insights that you picked up from the recent primary election. Where this is not a Republican gathering. I don't know anybody else would want to be a Democrat, but so you can talk about Democrat races if you choose to, and particularly as we go towards the general election. But y'all tell us what you think's going on. I'm gonna walk back here to Josh and turn this thing over. And yeah, Brad, you need to grow a beard next time. All right, here you go, Josh. Take us away.
All right, good evening, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? All right, so I want to open up and sort of ask everyone out here a question, and then I'm going to answer it for you. It's not really fair, I know. But, so, what, in your mind, what do you think of as the role of journalists? Because we have a very strange profession that's unlike anybody else's profession. We are one of the few jobs that is mentioned in the United States Constitution. We get paid to go to places where people can't go, do things that people might not necessarily want to do. Sometimes they're dangerous places, like the floor of the house. Sometimes they
Not
are,
the Senate.
and sometimes they're interesting places. Sometimes they are terribly boring places. But we do it so that you don't have to do it. And does everybody on stage sort of agree with my definition of what we do? Okay. So, anyway, yeah, keep that in mind, that we're not any different than anybody in the audience. We're just normal, everyday people who just spend our time accessing things that the public themselves can access, for the most part, if you dedicated your entire life to it. So, with that said, let's get into our first question here. All right, so in 2018 and 2022, people on this panel spent a lot of time discussing the increased polarization in American politics and Texas politics. Recently, it appears to me, at least, that we have seen even more polarization, especially a growing rift within the Texas Republican Party, centered largely around Greg Abbott and Abbott's agenda, whether that be school choice / vouchers, whatever you want to call it, immigration policy, etc. So what has changed in the past 2 years? Where are we headed, and why do you think we're headed that direction? Scott, if you want to go first.
I mean, if I go first, no one else is going to get to talk.
We'll cut you off.
I have till 9 o'clock or so. Look, I mean, when I think about what has been described as the Civil War within the Texas Republican Party, and was only more widely described that way, maybe in the last 2 to 4 years, I think where have y'all been? I've covered every Texas Republican Party chairman going back for 20, at least the last 20 years or so. We've had different chairs who were serious about different things. Some were serious about politics, some were serious about policy, some were serious about growing the party, and they're not interested in that anymore. Did you know that when groups of lowland gorillas in Africa are isolated, I'm going somewhere with this. By the way, I never lose my place. There are just pauses for dramatic effect. If there's a group of gorillas that has no other group to compete with, they start fighting with each other. The scientists, they find them, and they've got gouged out eyes, and they're ripping each other's faces off, and That's kind of what the Republican Party in Texas is doing right now. Democrats have been, completely off the battlefield as far as any kind of a statewide push, with the one exception being 2018, which of course we can talk about that and why that was more competitive. But I think in the last 2 to 4 years, you have seen just a complete absence of any kind of pushback from what should be the opposition party. And so this really has to do with fundraising. Because money is the lifeblood of politics. Y'all know that. It can be the devil's brew. But if you don't need to raise money to run against Democrats because they're not competitive, then who do you need to raise money to run against? Other Republicans, right? So I do think that one of the reasons that the governor's been so, not the only reason, but one of the reasons, this isn't that hard, why is it suddenly Greg Abbott cares so much about school vouchers and quote school choice? Well, he did get a $6 million check from one person, which is the largest, which is the single largest contribution to an office holder by one person ever. Before that, little Governor Dan Patrick set the record. Thank you. For a $3 million contribution that he got right before he was going to preside as the judge over the impeachment trial last year, which we can talk about that too. And he got that $3 million from supporters of Attorney General Ken Paxton. So, most of this is all about money, the business of politics. Things get very ugly very quickly, very nasty, but there's a reason for it. It's not just because, the oversimplified versions that you hear probably on television and NPR stations, because we're all on social media, we're on Twitter and Facebook, and when you're on social media, if that's the last conversation you have with somebody, then you're absolutely not going to be their friend, right? But if you pick up the phone and talk to them or see them out in person, it's fine. People flame me all the time on social media, and then when I see them, they're like, "Hey Scott, how are you? You put me in your paper." So we have these interactions online, but I think at the root of it, and I wonder what everybody thinks, at the root of it, it's about money, it's about fundraising. Is it really about passing a school voucher bill? We'll find out, and I know you want to get to that too. But in a lot of ways, what we just saw over the last couple of months in Texas with this all-out war all across the state really has to do with what we just saw, which is the raising and the spending of all of this money because it's big, big business. Anybody else?
I'll second that, this isn't new, and it might be reaching a peak right now, or close to one, but, we're all Americans. We're all psychos. We've been psychos since the founding, the election of 1800. Thomas Jefferson's campaign called John Adams a hermaphrodite. So there's been a lot of name calling over the last, since 2016 it's really picked up, but it's not new. Money's definitely part of it. One thing I see within the party apparatus, the most active activists, is this divide, what the role of the Republican Party of Texas is. Is it a battering ram against sitting legislators to try and advance certain policy priorities, or is it supposed to serve as an expansion agent? Is it supposed to try and just frankly win elections, get Republicans in elected office? And there's this massive fight between competing factions, and there are factions within the factions. This is not, I hear the word grassroots a lot used. Grassroots is divided. Anyone on the ground in these political fights knows that. And so this isn't new, but there is a very real philosophical divide, I think, within the party, and that is causing the chairmanship to jump back and forth between these two kind of general priorities and use it right now it's being used as a battering ram against sitting Republican legislators. A pretty effective one so far.
I think those are all good points by Brad. I don't think that we can have a discussion about the continually increasing polarization in politics nationally or in Texas, absent including the consequences of gerrymandering. I know that sounds academic, but we certainly see that in the consequences when it happens in Congress. And we also can't really have a discussion without talking about how that plays out in Texas. We can have an hours-long talk about how hapless Democrats are in Texas, and part of that is because don't feel good candidates, don't have good infrastructure, don't fundraise well. Part of that is structural disadvantages because of the effects of gerrymandering. Because the Republican Party has cemented its control over the legislature. Part of the reason Ian Scott had briefly referenced the 2018 election cycle and how Democrats did well. Part of that was because it was the end of the cycle before Republicans were able to redistrict after the 2020 election and sort of kind of reset that playing field when we saw the elections become much less competitive. Gerrymandering makes Republican districts not competitive for Republicans. It also makes Democratic districts not competitive for a lot of Democrats. So again, it drives down enthusiasm for their voters. It makes it hard for them to fundraise, get enthusiasm for candidates, field people to get their benches deep to in the future draft candidates for statewide office. So it's hard to have this big discussion about polarization and its effects without including these other ancillary things.
Everyone here has made amazing points so far. Just wanted to, I think the last thing I would add to it is because the districts are drawn the way they are, like I've mentioned, districts that are red got even redder, districts that are blue got even bluer, and so what does that mean in primaries? You want to turn out the voters who are going, your base voters, and that tends to be a smaller percentage of voters who will turn out than in a general election. Those people who turn out in a primary tend to be a little bit more partisan, tend to be a little more, solidly red or solidly blue, depending on what you're looking for. And so when it comes to a lot of primary fights, particularly on the Republican side of the House, one thing that I saw, and I know a lot of people on this stage have reported too, is that I feel like some opponents, and even Governor Abbott, I would say, was guilty of this as well, calling out incumbents for things that weren't necessarily true, but were issues that were important to those primary voters. So the border, for instance, just calling out incumbent records, whether it's true or not, but the border is a big issue. So that's something that's going to get voters' attention, regardless of whether what is said is true. And I think that makes it kind of hard for people in the legislature to fight back against those attacks, and I think that kind of contributes to some of the divide that we're seeing now with the Republican Party.
Alex, let me help you. They were lying. So no, look, there's by the way, in any discussion about media, I should say there's a place for all kinds of journalists, those who give their opinions, those who are just, there to give you the facts on the ground, not, connect too many dots, but just collect dots and you see what they are, and let you figure it out, although there is this wholesale effort to mislead you in a way that's different from before. So what we used to see in campaigns was, let's say that some members of the House voted against a school choice program. Their opponents would have argued with them about that. They would have said they were wrong and given you the reasons for why they voted that way. Instead, and by the way, we talked about this on my podcast over the last year or so, I kept thinking that based on the polling, thank you, I sound so much better. Based on the polling and based on what the discussions are like around the state, there was no way that incumbent Republicans were going to be beat in their primaries based on a vote against school vouchers. That wasn't going to happen. So I kept thinking and saying this out loud for the last 12 to 18 months or so as the governor was ramping all this up. He would have to beat them on other things. He'd have to say, he and his allies would have to say, they're not pro-life enough. They're not pro-gun enough. They don't love Jesus enough. They're not, pro-border security enough. What I couldn't have foreseen, and no one could have, would be that Abbott would hit this zenith with Republican voters in Texas and around the country about border security at this moment. And if you think about the politics in Texas, it used to be that we would think, that the Texas politics is national politics, and more it's vice versa. In the era of Donald Trump, with a certain set of voters, and I mean most Republican primary voters, the truth just doesn't matter, but that's not because of the voters. They didn't do that. It was the Trump campaign that, that started the whole idea that if you just, get ready, politics should these days come with a parental advisory. But it was Trump's campaign that basically established that you should just flood the field with bullshit so that people can't figure out what the truth is. And this was the quote from Trump's campaign digital guy, the guy from San Antonio, Carskill. He said, you do it until the truth is unknowable. And then, certain campaigns can operate in a way that allows you to win those campaigns. That's different. And so, for those of us in the media trying to figure out how to cover that has been a real struggle.
So I'm not sure that I would go quite as far to say that the truth is unknowable, but and
Well, I don't think that. That was a quote.
No, I know. And I swear I'm not saying.
Although there are days where I don't know.
But while we're on the topic, I'm sort of reading the tea leaves of the primary result, and I swear I'm not saying this to play to the home crowd here, but I think that it is simultaneously true that the results of the primary, like Governor Abbott is very, very close to getting what he wants with vouchers when the legislature convenes again next year. And also simultaneously true that what happened in March was not a referendum on vouchers. Because, and I'll pick on Mr. Lambert here because I went out to Abilene and covered his race in the primary. And what we saw in a lot of the messaging from the primary challengers was not about vouchers. It was about border security. It was about this incumbent is too liberal on whatever issue, but it wasn't about vouchers in the rural districts. And Lambert survived, but it was a much closer race than it really, frankly, should have been. But those were the issues that those challengers were running on. It was not vouchers in the rural districts. So I know the governor obviously had that takeaway, and that's what he's presenting publicly, but I don't think that's the right takeaway, frankly. I'm saying the governor is saying publicly, this was a referendum on vouchers. I don't think that's the right
Right,
takeaway.
he's lying again. I traveled this, and look, Zach and Brad and Alex did great work. I probably traveled the state more than any other human in the last 2 months. Everywhere from here in Nacogdoches, Beaumont, Port Arthur, Abilene, DFW, San Antonio, everywhere in between. And everywhere that I turned on the TV and heard radio, turned on the TV and saw TV ads, in my truck, turned on the radio and listened to the radio ads, attended all of the rallies with Governor Abbott. He was not talking about school choice and school vouchers. He was talking about the border and the idea that Republican incumbents could not be trusted to help him secure the border, which you can't call anything other than a lie when all of them voted in lockstep with him, everything he wanted on border security, including a law that's in the courts right now about deporting people back to Mexico with state police doing it. All of them voted that way in Houston. This is also different. It used to be that Republican members were so fearful that they'd have one vote on an amendment or a bill or something that they could be beaten up with, in mail pieces, on TV and radio. And now that doesn't even matter. They voted 100% on border security and just got slaughtered based on that issue, based on lies.
Well, to touch on what we drifted onto here in this first question. So
How was that, Josh?
it was great. So we all agree that the division that we have seen everywhere is increasing. And we are now living in a world where we have fewer and fewer local, regional, and state journalists. We have often people are turning to these hyper-partisan echo chambers online, whether that be social media. I was reading earlier that, and I can't remember the exact number, but the demographic that least trusts the media are 18 to 25. It was in some Pew research that came out last month. And so you have more people now seeking reporting, seeking information that only confirms what they already believe. It reminds me of the old Soviet propaganda slogan, nothing is real and everything is possible. And right now, for the past several years, only around 34% of all Americans say that they have trust in any media to report the news fully, accurately, and fairly. So as journalists, what is our role as all this is happening? What have we done wrong? What did we do to lead to all of this? And how do we win back these people who are only looking for confirmation bias?
I think part of it is, as Brad alluded to, calling out lies when they are lies. I think what's hard and in kind of a landscape where people only seek out the opinions that they already agree in is, are they going to see it as a lie in the same way that we are? And I think that's a challenge that we have as journalists. But it's including the context that maybe most voters don't, really understand or maybe don't care for. But I think it's still our job as journalists to say it. So one example, I know we're going to talk about this later, is the speaker's race. So I know a big issue that's come up in the speaker's race is that Speaker Phelan did not cast a vote on SB4. And that's factual, he did not cast a vote on SB4. But I think the context that's missing is that speakers often don't cast votes on a lot of legislation. And so it's like, you try to, as a journalist, I think we should explain that more to voters, but then the question becomes, are they listening to us, or do they just think that we're making excuses for somebody, maybe we're pro this candidate or pro X candidate. So I think that's definitely a challenge that you have to kind of deal with as a journalist, is how do you tell the truth to people who, no matter what you say, are just not going to believe you or not really give you the time of day.
There are a lot of people who just want to be told what they want to hear, obviously. But I think the media has some culpability here as well, especially in, I think it's most prominent in DC, but it's elsewhere too. There's been a lot of one-sided coverage of things, and to their credit, take Donald Trump, the biggest example of this, he's given them a lot of fodder. But there is a lot of hyperfixation on one side of the aisle, and in Texas, Republicans control things. That leaves them up for getting, hit on all kinds of stuff, right? They're the ones that actually pass things. But there is a massive slant in the media. And if you were to survey every reporter that does the job in the country, the center ideologically would be pretty left of center. That's just a fact of the industry. Those left of center tend to want to do this job more. Conservatives, those right of center, don't. And if you look at J schools, what they're turning out are, that typical kind of left of center reporter, especially the younger generation, I'd say. That doesn't mean they can't do their job well, but you look at the revolt within the New York Times. I mean, frankly, it's disgusting the way they have, especially the younger journalists, have, the inmates are running the prison. And there was, their COVID reporter there was some ancillary story that had nothing to do with his coverage, and the younger journalists mounted a revolt and got the guy fired. And he was kind of an old school reporter, himself left of center. And the media industry overall needs to take a good long look in the mirror and figure out, realize that people, in my opinion, want facts. They don't want to be generally told what to say. Analysis and opinion are two different things, right? Connecting the dots, as Scott said, is analysis, but just blasting out biased opinion poisons the water. And it makes people who may be persuadable to listen to whatever our reporting is entirely unwilling to listen to it, even if it negates their priors.
I think that Brad is right that media organizations bear a lot of culpability for the trust that they have and need to maintain, and in some cases need to rebuild with their readers. In Texas, I'm a reporter for the Texas Tribune. Most of our accountability reporting is focused on Republican officials, and that is by virtue of Republicans controlling all of the levers of state government, controlling all of the majority of the legislature. So I think that is the right call. It doesn't mean we don't cover Democratic officials, we do. Certainly at the local level where they have power in the urban counties, cities. That doesn't absolve us of the responsibility of really getting outside of Austin. I think that really is really important. And it's not just getting physically outside of Austin, although that is really important. I like to come out to do stuff like this. We travel a lot during the elections. It costs a lot of money to do, but I'm glad that we have the resources to do it. Going out to do stories like that, coming out to talk to legislators is good. But also that the types of sources that are professionals, the people that are in think tanks, the people that are paid professionally to have opinions, are the kind of people that you only talk to if you're only in the Capitol. If you're only in Austin, the kinds of stories you get have a certain kind of flavor. I think that's the case if you are, for example, based in New York or DC as well. So Texas being such a hugely diverse state geographically and all the other isms, it's so hugely important for journalists to get out and be all in all different sorts of places. And I'm glad that we're able to expand more and more beyond that. But I think that really is a root of a lot of issues if news organizations aren't able to not just expand beyond Austin, but wherever they are, not able to get out to outlying places.
I don't have an opinion about media bias. Let me say this. I think that it's important that, as I said in part of the beginning of this, there's a role for all different kinds of journalists, and that includes ideologically, right? Here's Brad from the Texan, leans more to the right, right? I'd say the Tribune maybe leans a little more to the left, not always though. Not always though. I'd say Texas Monthly is what? Well, let me just speak for myself. I just lean forward and say, so. That was my one, Travis. That was my one.
You not to do that.
Yeah, but you winked when you said no. I think that everyone you see here on the stage, though, is fundamentally committed to the truth, right? And so when I read the text, I don't just assume that what's in there is some spin that's made up to make me think a certain thing, because you're not doing that. I see that in your report. Same thing at the Tribune, same thing at Texas Monthly. The quorum report, well, at the Capitol, people will say we're the gossip rag of the Capitol. Some people say that derisively. I think it's just good marketing. People at the Capitol will say, did you hear this or did you hear that? And the other person goes, yeah, I read the quorum report too. And there's a place for that. There's a place for, trying to figure out what are the rumors that are happening at the Capitol. We serve that purpose, right? It can't always be that the only thing that can be reported is something that you have a document, you've got the video of it. There are a lot of things that happen in Texas government where it's just two guys said something in the room, or three guys did, and I figure out what it was because the third guy in the room texted me or texted somebody I know and said, hey, this is what happened. So we try to chase that down, right? And people will say, oh, well, that thing didn't happen. I guess that didn't pan out. And I have to tell them it didn't happen because we reported it that it might be about to happen. So there are places, there's a place for all different kinds of reporting. I know that during the primary, y'all's paper was calling out lies as they were happening in the state house race here. Some people would say that's going too far. I would say that you should do it. My deal is that, and it was one of my mentors said this years ago, that we do have a duty to be fair, but fairness is born of accuracy. Not just of me saying, oh, this person said this person said that, and so I've done my job and that's all there is to it. I think we owe the audience better than that. As long as we do that, there will be an audience for it. But as far as getting people back who only want to hear what they already agree with, a lot of those folks are just going.
Anybody else have anything else you want to add before we move on?
I was just going to add to your point. I think sometimes in political journalism, there's this idea of both sidesism. So if we're calling out one bad thing that the Republican Party did, we also have to counter that with one bad thing that a Democrat did. And I think that honestly does a lot of disservice to readers because it's not fully, it's just pulling things that aren't necessarily equatable, but are just, I feel like there's almost a fear of if you're calling out one side for doing something, then you have to do it on the other side. And I think what Scott said is really true, is that it comes down to like accuracy. If you're calling out, you know, someone in the party for doing something unfairly or for lying or misleading on someone's record, I think that's fine to do, and I think that's accurate to do. I think, as you two have gotten at, the reason why a lot of coverage is on Republicans, particularly in Texas politics, is because we are a Republican state. Republicans control all levels of statewide government. They control the House and the Senate. So I think it makes sense, but I think, yeah, I guess I don't put as much, I blame the media some, but I don't think the onus rests entirely on the media when it comes to an electorate who fundamentally does not want to hear the truth if it doesn't align with what they already believe.
All right. So,
The proceeding was an advertisement for journalism that was outstanding.
2024, pretty bad year for Republican incumbents. During this primary season, as millions and millions of dollars was pumped in from outside of Texas to unseat Republicans under the guise, if you want to call it, of not agreeing with Abbott's voucher plan. So what sort of tone do you think this sets for Texas politics moving into the future? What sort of repercussions should the people expect? Not just in January, but perhaps 5, 10, 15 years down the line.
I don't know.
We'll let you start. Go.
Okay, my fear going forward, and I spoke to Representative Clardy about this, is that if you are not doing what Abbott, what big donors want, what Lieutenant Governor wants, then your seat might be up for grabs the next time you're up for re-election. And I think what is kind of worrisome is that vouchers was like a very big thing this past session, and I want to say maybe the preceding session, but maybe not as big of an issue, not as much, but definitely definitely not to the extent that we saw it in 2023. And so my fear is that if you are someone in the ledge who disagrees with the governor or disagrees what he wants, and maybe you're voting your district, you're voting what you think is the best interest of your district, that might not matter as much. And that's kind of scary to me, because the idea of being a legislator is like this idea of like the citizen legislator. You're not paid a lot to be in the ledge, you know. You do it because you know, I would like to think, you know, maybe this is too optimistic of me, but that you believe in what you're doing and you really care for your district and your constituents. And my fear is that, you know, moving forward, that there won't be a lot of leeway for legislators to have that independence to vote their district if it goes against what the people in power want.
Yeah, just sort of an extension of that. I worry about the long-term independence of the House as an institution. You have seen Lieutenant Governor Patrick with Speaker Strauss and then Speaker Phelan really pressure the House to do what he wants the House to do with varying levels of success. I don't see why he would let up that pressure, because he has sort of gotten his way. I think there's a lot of pressure on whoever the next speaker is in January, even if by some good fortune or miracle that it still is Phelan, that, you know, Patrick lets up. I think that it is likely that the House is a less independent body, and I think that is to the disservice of a lot of the districts, especially a lot of the rural ones that have more of a say, that have you know, more members that actually get, you know, some more influence in this lower chamber.
Governor Abbott was undoubtedly the biggest force in this primary. Nobody else had $6 million to put behind one issue. I don't think Paxton put anything behind the impeachment.
Not of his own.
Bench toward, no. So to me, it's unquestionable that Abbott was the biggest factor here. But he was responding to an opportunity. He saw a window of opportunity to take out Representative Clardy was one of them. And politics is a contact sport, and I think the strategy can absolutely rightly be criticized, especially considering the about face that he did compared to 2022, where he backed many of the incumbents that he then took out. But there was a very real shift in the political wind of at least the most active portion of the Republican base. And Abbott, he's liked vouchers for a while. He just never saw the opportunity to really, go for broke on it. And he did, and he was pretty successful on it. So, the governor doesn't do much without polling, and he saw polling, and it was not good for incumbents. And he just pushed all the chips in and came out ahead.
So, issues aside, I think it's important to think about the roles of the different branches of government. Whether the issue is water for South Texas or water wherever in Texas. What is it? Whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting over. Infrastructure needs, public education, healthcare, you name it. The different roles of the different branches of government are supposed to be, learn this in grade school just like me, that you've got an executive, you've got the legislative branch, you've got the courts, and these are all independent and co-equal, right? And the point is that there are checks and balances. The governor is not the boss. The speaker is not the boss. The lieutenant governor is not the boss. The House members are not the boss. The senators are not the boss. The boss is Texans, right? It's all of you. If you live in East Texas, you're just as much the boss as if you live in West Texas or Houston or DFW or San Antonio or anywhere in between. And sometimes the needs of certain communities often will just get pulled, just steamrolled at the Capitol because of certain interests, and that's always going to happen. You're always going to have a push and pull. But this governor has always thought that the legislature works for him. Part of the reason he thinks that is because he was never in the legislature. I mean, look at, you had, previously when Governor Bush was there, before he ascended to the White House, he had never been a legislator either, but he respected the process. Back then, if you walked the halls of the Capitol, and you might knock the door and walk into Stan Lambert's office, Governor Bush might be just sitting there on the couch, and he'd say, "Hey, Governor, what's going on?" I'm supposed to meet with Mr. Lambert, and the governor would say, "Can I sit in on your meeting?" He'd be like, "I'll just come back." Rick Perry would do something similar. He'd be on the floor of the House, the floor of the Senate, talking to them, trying to, convince them that he was right about various things. Abbott wants to order the legislature to do things. And the founder, and it's not my opinion that it shouldn't work that way, that's not the way the founders set it up. In fact, the founders of Texas set up a weak governor system because this was always more of a, get this, freedom-loving, more of a libertarian kind of system where you only have a 5-month session every 2 years, 140 days to get things done. And instead, we have now 8 and 9 month sessions where we're going to check every box that anybody was ever pissed about. We're going to pass a bill about that. And so as Texans, your employees don't have a deadline for getting their work done because the governor will just keep calling them back forever. Now, as far as what this primary means for all of that, I think there are choices. I think when people in power, or I'm going to put it this way, when people who have a say in it, when they have a choice, when they have a vote, often, folks who are not in as high of an office as the governor or the lieutenant governor, they'll feel sort of resigned to the idea that, school vouchers is something I'm not for, but it's going to pass anyway because of the governor not having that great primary for himself. Or, the Speaker of the House is going to be somebody who just naturally does everything the governor wants. When folks who have a vote say it that way, they speak it into existence. It doesn't have to be that way. The House has a choice. It can pick whoever they want from their members as far as who they want to be the Speaker. There are Republican activists in this state who have been working a long time to try to ensure that Democrats don't have a role in picking the Speaker. I'm here to tell you, with the Republican caucus as fractured as it has ever been, get this, the Democratic caucus is the largest voting bloc for Speaker today as we come out of this. And it may be that, people say, Zach, you mentioned that, maybe they're real close to doing the voucher deal now. Well, that leaves out that there is a general election, right? And I can see Democrats picking, this is a Trump year. Democrats could pick up as many as 8 seats in the Texas House. That would wipe out everything the governor just did as far as trying to pass that. So we'll see what happens. Point being that, and I mean this for every one of them who signed that amendment, the Rainey Amendment, to strip vouchers out of HB1 at the end of last year, the sweeping education package. They were signing their political death warrants for a lot of them, right? You had this primary where quite a few of them lost or went into runoffs, but there's a lot of the story left to be written. We don't know who the speaker's going to be. We don't know what the makeup of the House is going to be. We don't even know what the bill would look like. Jeff Leach, one of the chairmen in the House, was just on TV in Dallas a couple weeks ago saying that whatever they do on school choice will have to be like what they tried to do in that education bill last year, that everything will have to go in one bill. Because he understands the politics of the House. It's not as simple as counting to 76. It matters what the bill looks like. And there are a lot of Republicans who voted to move it forward because they wanted to see more public education money. It wasn't necessarily because they were for school vouchers. It was way more dynamic than folks just being for one thing or for the other thing or against it. I think what's really at stake is whether you have, I hate to say it this way, but we're moving there not just in Texas but across the country. You have a presidential nominee in waiting who has said he'll be a dictator just for a day. But that's how dictatorships start.
Governor Abbott has a massive bully pulpit, and I lay the blame at the feet of people. Ask a random person who they think is the face of the political system, and it's the president, right? Make the same, extrapolate that down to the state level, they say the governor. And so people that aren't following this every day, like I'm sure everyone in this room is, or pretty close to it, their heuristic is the governor, if they're on the Republican side of things. And that comes with a lot of power, and that's until people take that away, take that influence away, until frankly the legislature, this is more of a problem in Congress, but until the legislature reasserts itself, this is how it's going to be. The Texas Constitution, I think it's Article 2, but it's the first branch of the government listed. In the U.S. Constitution, it's the Article 1 branch, and it's the Article 1 branch for a reason. It is supposed to be the place where actual policy starts, and it is, but now you have, over the centuries, you have an executive-led policy apparatus, and part of that is representatives have to run every 2 years, and it's very hard to pass a lot of important, controversial bills and then run for re-election and make it back. And so that is itself a byproduct of the emphasis placed on the executive branch by the average voter. And until you fix that, I don't see how this improves at all.
We talked a lot here about the power and the platform of Governor Abbott. Do you feel that incumbents did enough pushback during the primary season? If there was more pushback from incumbents, more people saying that it is the voters who truly have the power, rather than the governor, would we be looking at a different situation across the Texas House now? Or does Abbott have so much power that it's impossible to even push back on him now?
I mean, keep in mind, Abbott didn't force people to vote the way they voted. They responded to messaging, which we talked about the issues with that. Very real inconsistencies there. But the governor still did campaign on vouchers. He placed a lesser emphasis on that than he did the border. But the border is the one that plays. And I don't see... The governor wasn't the only thing that took out, 9 incumbents? People did too. in fact, they were the ones that actually did it. They were at the root of it, and cry foul about the messaging. Legit concerns there, absolutely. But in the end, this is a republic, and the voters went one way. Maybe the political winds shift, and we see it go back the other way.
In 2002, there was a wholesale effort to break Texas campaign finance law by business groups and by former Majority Leader Tom DeLay from the Houston area to spend, at the time, we thought it was a lot of money. It was only tens of thousands of dollars, compared to, really, we were talking less than $200,000 that was just, changing hands between different PACs, state and federal. There were indictments. The Majority Leader was indicted in Travis County on money laundering charges, along with some other Republican operatives. One of those operatives has gone on to work for Governor Abbott, and also ran one of the pro school choice PACs this year for Doug Beeson and Leo Lindbeck from Dallas and Houston, respectively. One of the family empowerment bullshit PACs, whatever it was. And and we want to have fun though. And thank you. And okay. And then I gotta go. Yeah, right. And then again, never lose my place. But this year, millions and millions and millions of dollars. We were only talking about the millions of dollars from Abbott, which was $6 million worth of laundered TikTok money. From a TikTok billionaire from out of state, right? And then you add in the other money from Zach. What would it have been? More like 10 million or so for when you add in the other tax. It's around that number, right? Who's counting? Spread across these races, where you might have the governor spending $1 million. You might have other PACs like Texans for Lawsuit Reform here in East Texas spending a lot of money, up to $2 million or so at least, something like that. And you had the Defend Texas Liberty folks, whatever they're calling themselves now. I just still call all those folks Empower Texas because it's all the same thing as years ago. Thank you, one person. And been around for a while. But it's the money. It's always the money. It is the money. As I was going around the state, if you would go to Liberty County, for example, where Ernest Bales was the incumbent and was beat down there, if you turned on the TV or the radio, it was just ads trashing him on a loop. There were no commercials for businesses. Just that he was terrible. It was just PAC saying it, it was his opponent saying it, another PAC would say it, then another PAC would say it, then the governor would say it on TV. The governor would look into the TV and into the TV camera and say, "I can't trust Travis Clardy to help me secure the border. I can't trust Ernest Bales," and all of this. And so it wasn't just the endorsements or the power of us knowing who the governor is, or voters knowing who the governor is. If they didn't know who the governor was before January, they sure as hell figured it out by March 5th, right? Because he was all over the place telling people how they should vote in his opinion. And so we figured out that you can change the game as far as how these races work with a certain amount of money, right? It was always our understanding. This tested the way that we understand these House races to work, right? Until now, it's always been you've got to do your block walking. If you're somebody running for a state representative as a Republican, you need to, in your district, you need to go everywhere that 3 Republicans are having coffee, you go talk to them, right? That's how you do these races. You knock on doors, you talk to people, you go sit on the hay bale at the hayride, you do all of that stuff, right? And that didn't matter because it was the spigot was open. There was just non-stop avalanche of lies against people. And this is completely different too. In 2002, that was a general election, and that's when different groups were trying to purge the last of sort of conservative Democrats out of the Texas House and make it a Republican body, which they got that in 2003. This time around, first time we've seen this in a primary this way, where we're going to not just purge people based on party, but and not even based on ideology, based on specific issues, specific votes, and how we want them to behave, and have them be treated like employees rather than representatives of the people who elect them.
Yeah, and real quick, just going back to a point that Brad had made, I do think it is important for voters to be as engaged as possible possible about what their legislators are doing in Austin. But it is one thing to expect them to remember, like, oh, the House in one of the special sessions last fall passed 2 border security bills that did this and this and this, while also being bombarded with the millions of dollars in anti sort of border security messaging in their district in the weeks before the primary.
All right, let's move on to the Speaker of the House. Dave Phelan, one of the folks who didn't do so well in the primary. Primary didn't treat him great. And then last month, Tom Oliverson announced that he plans to run for House Speaker. Phelan's finished second in his primary race down in Beaumont, and he's in a pretty big brawl, sort of a fight for his life down there right now. The runoff coming up at the end of May. And even if he can pull out a victory, speakership again for him not looking very possible. So, what's the path to the speaker's gavel in 2025, and what do we need to be on the lookout for?
Well, I think nobody really knows. Speaking of Beaumont, Port Arthur, I see Representative Christian Manuel back there. I don't think he was here earlier. Good to see you, sir. He could probably answer better what's going on in the Golden Triangle.
Yeah, come on up.
Christian, you stay in the back.
I don't know that. Look, I mean, I'll say this: the speaker is the speaker until he's not. When people will say that, and there's been a lot of this talk that he can't be the speaker anymore because he's in a runoff. The last time it happened, the sitting speaker was defeated, it was decades ago. This exact scenario has never really played out. So I told everybody in Austin, calm down just a little bit. We don't know what's going to happen here. There's no way to know that. Just the other day, in Dallas-Fort Worth, up in Frisco, in DFW, at the new PGA Omni, which sounds really cool. When I drove by it last time, a couple years ago, it was still under construction. The House Republican Caucus had their private dinner, which is only as private as it can be if people don't start shouting at each other in there. People outside the room can hear them, and of course then I start texting all the members that I know. And so what's going on in there? And what was going on is this big battle about who the speaker's going to be and who's going to back up Republican incumbents who are in runoffs right now. One of the chairmen in the House was challenging the new chairman of the Republican caucus, Tom Oliverson from the Houston area, trying to get him to say, just trying to get Representative Oliverson to say that he's going to support Republican incumbents who are in runoffs and through the fall, and was demanding that Oliverson put out a public statement, apparently saying that just say you support all these incumbents, including the speaker, right? Which is kind of awkward since Oliverson's running for speaker against the speaker who's in a runoff in Southeast Texas. So all of it really is a battlefield right now. It comes back to what I was talking about, which is the House is going to have a whole lot of choices going forward. I think for Phelan, it's fair to say this. There have been a lot of folks who, you're not wrong, but a different take. It was no surprise to me that he was not only in a runoff but came in second. I was there some of you might have been there as well, in Beaumont, Port Arthur, when Governor Perry came in, and Perry comes in and he was doing the Governor Perry show. Sometimes I miss Governor Perry. He had a long part. After he got done speaking, by the way, he came off of the stage. I hadn't seen him in a couple of years, and Perry comes up, "Hey Scott, how you doing?" He points at my gray beard. He goes, "We're all a little older now, aren't we?" I said, "You more than me." He appreciated it. But he was in fine form, and he was having to educate the Republican voters there about this whole issue of why Democrats had chairmanships in the House. Rick Perry, an elder statesman of the Republican Party in Texas, saying, yes, Phelan appoints Democratic chairs. And he said, quote, "So did I when I was the lieutenant governor, and so does the current lieutenant governor." Now, Governor Patrick would say that he doesn't do that anymore. I would say only for 3 months. Ever since he came into the office, he's had Democratic chairman in the Senate the whole time. We never ever hear about that. It's only Democratic chairs in the House. But the institution itself is under assault right now in a huge way, in a way that we've never seen before. And the thing about the House is the Speaker is tasked. His number one job is the first standing order of the presiding officer. It's not a specific agenda. It's not certain issues that they need to pass bills about. His first standing order is to protect the House. Now, if Phelan doesn't get the job done in this election, I would say, but there's a couple of times when he didn't do that. One was they did have a vote on vouchers when they didn't have to. They didn't have to do that. He didn't have to bring that to the floor. Number two, he didn't pass a teacher pay raise to the governor when the lieutenant governor had set him up to do that. The lieutenant governor had sent the bill to the House that they could have just passed. It wasn't perfect, but it did have more money for teachers in it. They could have passed that. The speaker didn't do it. And then the other thing that we haven't really talked about is, I'm not saying that they were wrong to impeach Paxton. If anything, they could still be working on that right now. They could have held hearings and just kept having hearings. Some of the old hands, some of the old Republicans at the Capitol said, why did they move so fast on that? Why not just have hearings forever about it? Isn't that kind of the way we always did this before? Some of you might remember, that's my cue. Some of y'all might remember the impeachment proceedings against the UT regent named Wallace Hall that just dragged out in the House forever. The reason you might, if you don't remember it, the reason is they didn't really do anything at the end, but they did deal with the problem that they had. And so moving so fast on that, sort of walking the, two observations on it, walking the members into a box canyon with no way out politically was probably not wise. It wasn't really protecting the House. Two, this is the counter argument to that. It's hard for me because the vast majority, 70% of Texas House Republicans voted for impeachment, and they have spent the last year being attacked about it, being attacked for it. That makes them a cohesive group. And so that's probably, after the Democrats, that's the second largest voting bloc for speaker. So it's really hard for me to see how anybody who voted against the impeachment or who wasn't on the floor, there was only one Republican not on the floor when the impeachment happened.
Who was that?
Tom Oliverson. It's really hard for me to see how any Republican who didn't vote to impeach has any path to speaker because those folks all feel like they had to go through that crucible today.
Josh, I'll wind it up and say,
All right.
All right, anybody have anything they want to close with here?
It's definitely not over. Phelan could, if he wins the race, he absolutely could be speaker again. I think that's something that everyone's discounting, or at least the people that are claiming he's no longer speaker are discounting. I think the other interesting factor to watch is the number that matters here is 76. And just 2 speakers ago, first time Joe Strauss came to power, the number was 12 Republicans and then the whole Democratic caucus. And it will be interesting to see if those who are trying to boot Phelan out of power have overplayed their hand and you get another Democratic-led caucus speakership similar to Strauss. Now maybe the calculus has changed after these incumbent flips. I don't know. Who knows what the hell's going to happen until you actually get past these runoffs and know what the membership is going to be. But it would be very odd to see us right back where we were.
Yeah, I think who the hell knows what's going to happen is the takeaway from this panel. But as much as I just add real quick, like as much as political reporters, we are just like dying to know what the members are thinking. We are in this weird no man's land where like really no member really wants to say anything about the speakership before Phelan's runoff because we don't know if he'll even survive. There's no reason for them to say what they want to do with him. So.
But I just remember how crazy it was right before Dennis Bonnen became speaker. Everyone, came out of the woodwork, wanted to run for speaker, and then all of a sudden Dennis Bonnen came along and said, I have the votes, it's over today. And
He's always right.
Yeah.
well, yeah. But all of a sudden, it seemed like all of a sudden to people who were maybe as in the know that he suddenly came along and said, I vote for speaker. So we don't know what's going to happen this year. I don't think Oliverson will be the last Republican to announce a bid against Phelan. I'll be interested to see in, not having Democratic chairs, if that's going to be like the big talking point, the big thing that we need to become Speaker of the Texas House. But yeah, I agree with what everyone's saying so far is that we really don't know what we don't know.
Well, Josh, before I relinquish the microphone, I want to say one other thing. I cannot stay for the party tonight. I have to go to Dallas. I've got another speaking gig up there. You've made me famous. Now everybody wants me wherever in Texas. I want to stand and say this before I leave East Texas tonight. Representative Clardy, thank you for your service. now, Brad. Josh, you did a great job on this. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks for everybody coming out tonight, listening to all of us, and hopefully you learned something.